I knew I should not have walked into Sloane Merritt's engagement party. Every reasonable part of me knew it. I had no invitation, no polished navy suit, no family name that meant anything in Charleston, and no business stepping across the marble threshold of a mansion where men like me were usually hired to fix something after the rich people went home. But reasonable had already cost me 5 years. Reasonable had made me leave this city once with my pride packed in a duffel bag and her almost confession still burning a hole in my memory. So when the valet outside the Halstead house asked for my name, I told him Dane Calder and watched his polite smile fail to recognize it. That was fine. I had not come to be recognized by the room. I had come because of one sentence Sloane had sent me at 3:42 that afternoon. After 5 years of silence, I forgot what it feels like to choose something because I want it. The house looked exactly like the kind of place built to make ordinary people apologize for breathing too loudly. White columns, gas lanterns, magnolias bending over the drive, champagne glasses flashing under chandeliers older than most marriages in that room. I had spent the last decade moving through hurricane zones, wildfire towns, flooded roads, and gymnasiums full of cots, so I knew what panic looked like when it was honest. The strange thing was, panic in a ballroom wore better shoes. It laughed softly, touched pearls, thanked donors, and pretended nobody was measuring the distance between a woman's smile and the truth behind it. I stood just inside the entrance with rain still clinging to the shoulders of my work jacket, and 3 different people looked at me like I had tracked mud across their bloodline. Maybe I had. Maybe that was why it felt so good not to turn around. Then I saw her. Sloane stood near the center of the ballroom beside Pierce Halstead, under a ridiculous arch of white roses that looked expensive enough to fund an emergency shelter for a week. She wore a pale gold dress that made her look like candlelight had learned how to breathe, and for one stupid second, all the anger I had carried into that room went quiet. She was still Sloane, not the foundation director smiling for photographers, not Blythe Merritt's perfect daughter. Not Pierce's future wife being displayed like the final piece in a family merger, just Sloane, the woman who used to laugh with her whole body when she forgot she was supposed to be composed, the woman who once told me she envied storms because at least they were allowed to break things. Her left hand rested against Pierce's sleeve, and the ring on her finger caught the chandelier light, but her right hand kept moving to her wrist, thumb rubbing the inside of it in small, hidden circles. I remembered that habit. She only did it when she felt trapped and was trying not to show it. A camera lowered near my shoulder, and a woman with dark curls and a sharp black dress said quietly that if I planned to make a scene, I should at least stand where the lighting was better. I looked over and recognized Noemi Velez from the Foundation's event photos online, though her eyes told me she had recognized me from something more private. "You're Dane," she said, like it explained both the problem and the weather. I asked if Sloane knew I was coming, and Noemi's mouth tightened before she said that Sloane had been pretending not to look at the entrance for the last 20 minutes. That landed harder than I expected. I had walked in prepared to be hated, dismissed, maybe escorted out by some discreet security man with a tasteful earpiece. I had not prepared for the idea that part of her had been waiting. Noemi glanced toward the ballroom and told me Pierce was about to make the formal toast, which meant after that, every person in the room would feel invited to treat the engagement like a completed transaction. "If you're leaving quietly again," she said, "do it now." I looked at Sloane rubbing her wrist and said I was done being the man who left quietly. Pierce lifted his glass before I moved. That was the thing about men like him. They always knew when a room belonged to them, and they always knew how to use everyone else's manners as a fence. He was handsome in a clean, expensive way, with perfect hair and the kind of smile that made older women trust him and younger men want to punch him for reasons they could not explain. He started by thanking the donors, then Blythe, then the Foundation board, and finally he turned toward Sloane with a tenderness so smooth it made my jaw tighten. He said she had brought grace to his life, discipline to his future, and beauty to the Halstead legacy. Not once did he say she made him laugh. Not once did he say she wanted this. The room sighed anyway because people hear velvet and assume it means warmth. Sloane smiled at the correct moment. Then her thumb pressed harder into her wrist, and something in me that had survived flood sirens, collapsed roads, and burning towns simply stopped negotiating. I stepped forward, not fast, not dramatic, I did not shove through anyone or raise my voice like a drunk man trying to win a woman by volume. I moved the way I moved when a supply route had failed and everyone was still pretending the plan could be saved. People shifted before they understood why. A few faces turned, then more. Then a soft wave of recognition without recognition passed through the ballroom. Pierce saw me first, and his smile did not disappear. It sharpened. Blythe Merritt's eyes went cold from across the room. But I was not looking at them. I was looking at Sloane, because the moment she saw me, her practiced expression cracked. It was only half a second, maybe less. But I had built my whole life on reading the difference between damage and collapse, and I knew the look of someone who had been holding herself up for too long. I stopped at the edge of the gathered guests, close enough that she could hear me if she wanted to, far enough that she could pretend she had not. My heart was hitting my ribs hard, but my voice came out steady, which was either courage or years of lying to emergency crews so they would not hear fear in the command. I said her name first, just Sloane. Pierce gave a small laugh and began to say this was not the time, but I cut through him without looking away from her. I told her I was not there to embarrass her, not there to drag her anywhere, not there to make her pay for what we never said 5 years ago. Then I took one more breath and said, "Say no, and come with me." The room went so silent I could hear ice settle in someone's glass. Sloane's lips parted. Blythe whispered something sharp to a man beside her. Pierce's hand tightened around his champagne flute, but Sloane did not look at him. She looked at me like the sentence had reached some locked room inside her and turned the handle. For 1 second, I thought she might run to me. That was the selfish version of the fantasy, the one I hated myself for wanting, and wanted anyway. But Sloane Merritt had never been the kind of woman who could be saved by a man walking into a room and saying the right line. If she left, it would have to be because something in her finally stood up. She looked down at the ring, and the diamond threw a hard little star of light against her dress. Then she looked back at me, and I saw fear there. Yes, but not only fear. I saw anger, grief, hope, and something painfully close to relief. Her mouth moved. She whispered something I could not hear over the sudden rush of blood in my ears and the whole room holding its breath. For a moment after I said it, nobody moved, like the entire ballroom had forgotten how bodies worked. Then Charleston remembered itself. A woman near the roses gave a small, offended gasp. A man behind Pierce muttered something about security, and Blythe Merritt crossed half the room with the kind of controlled speed only rich mothers and incoming storms had mastered. Sloane still had not answered me. Her hand had lowered from Pierce's sleeve, and that tiny distance felt louder than any speech she could have made. Pierce turned slightly, putting himself between her and the room without fully blocking her from me, which was clever. He wanted to look protective, not possessive, and I hated how practiced he was at making control look like manners. Blythe reached them first, touched Sloane's elbow, and said with a bright little laugh that carried just far enough, "Everyone, please forgive the interruption. Mr. Calder is an old acquaintance of the family, and clearly he has chosen an unfortunate moment." Then her eyes cut to me, cold and precise, as she added under her breath that I would leave before I made this uglier. I almost laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because ugly had always been their word for anything honest. 5 years ago, ugly was me standing in the Merritt kitchen with work boots on their polished floor, telling Sloane I did not care about their guest list or their donor board or whether her mother thought my life smelled like diesel and motel coffee. Ugly was Sloane looking at me like I had just offered her air, then looking away because every portrait on the wall seemed to be watching her choose. I had walked away after that because I thought I was being noble. I told myself a woman like Sloane should not have to burn down her whole world for a man who spent half his life responding to places other people were fleeing. But standing there now, watching Blythe use that same soft pressure on her daughter's arm, I understood something I should have understood years ago. Sometimes walking away does not protect a woman from the fire. Sometimes it leaves her in the house. Noemi saved the room before I could make it worse. A flash popped too close to the champagne tower, then another, and someone yelped as the photographer's assistant pretended to stumble into a waiter with a tray of untouched crab cakes. It was not chaos, exactly, but it was enough movement for Sloane to pull her arm from her mother's hand. She did not come to me. She turned away from everyone and slipped through a side door beneath a carved archway, the gold skirt of her dress brushing the dark wood like a flame trying not to be seen. Noemi appeared near me again as if she had stepped out of the wallpaper and said, without looking at me, that the old library had 2 exits, one lock that stuck, and a balcony door nobody used because the hinges screamed. I told her she was very good at her job. She said she was excellent at it, and if I hurt Sloane tonight, she would make sure every photo ever taken of me looked like evidence. Then she nodded once toward the side door. I went. The library smelled like old paper, lemon oil, and money that had stopped trying to impress anyone because it had already won. Sloane stood near the desk with her back to me, one hand braced against the leather top, the other pressed flat against her stomach like she was holding herself together by force. I stopped in the doorway. Every instinct in me wanted to cross the room, touch her shoulder, take the ring off her finger, do something useful with my hands because useful was safer than wanting. But she had not invited me closer. So I stayed where I was and said her name again, quieter this time. She turned so fast the diamonds at her ears flashed. For 1 second, all I saw was hurt. Then anger rose up behind it, clean and bright, and she asked me if I had any idea what I had just done. I said yes, though the truth was probably no. Nobody ever really knows the size of a grenade until it lands. She let out a breath that almost became a laugh, but there was nothing amused in it. She told me I did not get to walk into her engagement party like some righteous storm after 5 years of silence. She said I had no right to look at her that way, as if I had found her drowning when I was the one who left her on the shore. That hit exactly where she meant it to. I closed my hand around the door frame and told her I left because I thought she had chosen this life over me. Sloane stared at me like I had spoken a language she hated but understood. She said she thought I left because I was tired of waiting for her to be brave. The room seemed to narrow around us. All those years I had carried one version of the wound, polished it, protected it, turned it into proof that I had been right not to come back. And there she was, holding a different wound in the same place. I told her I had received nothing from her after I left for the Gulf contract. No call, no letter, no message that did not sound like it had been written by someone standing beside her mother. Sloane's face changed then, not softened exactly, but shifted, as if a door inside her had opened onto a room she had locked years ago. She asked what I meant by no letter. Before I could answer, a knock came at the library door, measured and calm, 3 soft taps that somehow sounded more insulting than pounding. Pierce's voice followed, smooth through the wood, asking if Sloane wanted him to handle this. She closed her eyes, and the old instinct moved across her face. Make it easy. Make it quiet. Make no one uncomfortable except herself. I hated that I recognized it. I hated more that I had helped teach her she would have to face it alone. I took 1 step back from the doorway instead of forward, because if she was going to answer him, it had to be her answer, Sloane noticed. Her eyes opened, and for the first time since I had entered the library, she looked less like she was defending herself from me and more like she was deciding whether I was still the man she remembered. On the desk between us, half hidden beneath a stack of donor envelopes and a guest book, something pale blue stuck out from inside an old hardcover. I would have ignored it if the corner had not been marked with a familiar black line, the kind I used to draw on route maps when bridges were washed out and roads became lies. My breath caught before my mind caught up. Sloane followed my gaze and went very still. It was an old folded evacuation map, worn soft at the edges, tucked inside a book like a secret that had survived both of us. The map should not have been there. That was the first thought I had, stupid and practical, as if the universe had violated some inventory rule by placing a 5-year-old memory on a library desk during the worst engagement party in South Carolina. I remembered the night I gave it to her with embarrassing clarity. It had been late summer, the air thick enough to drink, and Sloane had found me in the alley behind the foundation after a donor dinner, still wearing her black dress and the kind of smile people use when they are exhausted from being admired incorrectly. I had been marking alternate evacuation routes for a coastal storm that eventually turned north, and she had leaned over my shoulder and asked if I could draw one for her. When I asked where she wanted to go, she said anywhere nobody expected her to be gracious. I had laughed then, because I thought she was joking, but I had drawn a route anyway in black marker from Charleston to a tiny mountain town where I knew a motel owner who never asked questions. I wrote one word in the corner: breathe. Sloane reached for the map before I did, but she did not pick it up. Her fingers hovered over it like touching it might set off something louder than Pierce waiting outside the door. The library door knocked again, and Pierce said her name with patient concern, that careful tone men use when they want witnesses to believe they are reasonable. Sloane did not answer him. She was looking at the map, and all the anger she had thrown at me a minute earlier had shifted into something I did not know how to defend against. She said she used to think it was ridiculous that I gave her a real route, with gas stations circled and washed-out roads crossed off, just because she made one tired joke in an alley. Then she admitted she kept it in her desk drawer for 2 years, moved it to her nightstand for 1, and finally hid it in that book when Pierce started spending more time at her apartment. Her voice stayed controlled, but her thumb dragged once over the crease where the paper had nearly torn. I unfolded it when I needed to remember I had once been a woman who wanted to leave, she said. I had come into that house angry enough to fight every polished lie in it, but that sentence took the fight out of me in a different way. Not because I wanted less, but because wanting suddenly had weight. For 5 years, I had told myself Sloane chose comfort. I had pictured her stepping neatly into the life her mother approved of. Sad, maybe, but safe, surrounded by money and music and men who never smelled like storm drains at 2 a.m. That story had helped me survive the humiliation of feeling left behind. It had made me harder, sharper, better at walking away before anyone could call it abandonment. But the map lying there between us said she had not forgotten. It said she had been carrying an exit in secret while I was carrying resentment like proof. I asked her why she never used it, and she looked up at me with a small, devastated smile and said that knowing where the door was did not mean she knew how to open it. The room felt too small for all the years we had misunderstood each other. Sloane finally picked up the map, unfolded it once, then stopped before opening it all the way. I saw my own handwriting in the corner, faded but still there, and something in my chest pulled tight enough to hurt. She told me she hated me for leaving, but she hated herself more for being relieved that I had, because if I had stayed and asked again, she might have had to find out who she really was. That was the first honest cruelty either of us had said all night, and I respected it too much to flinch. I told her I hated myself for being proud of my restraint, because I had called it love when maybe it was fear dressed up as respect. Sloane's eyes lifted to mine. She said she used to wonder whether I wanted her enough to make trouble. I said I had wanted her enough to leave before I became trouble. Her laugh broke softly, without humor, and she told me that was exactly the problem. That was when I noticed the bracelet. Not because it was obvious. It was almost hidden beneath a slim diamond cuff Pierce had probably chosen because it looked expensive enough to silence questions. But under it, closer to her skin, was a thin silver chain with a tiny bent clasp I recognized immediately. I had fixed it with a multi-tool in the parking lot of a grocery store after some foundation fundraiser where she had escaped early and found me loading generators for a shelter site. She had said the bracelet was cheap, not worth saving, and I had told her most things worth saving looked unimpressive to the wrong people. Seeing it on her wrists now, under all those diamonds, did something dangerous to me. I must have been staring because Sloane touched it self-consciously and said she wore it when she needed to remember someone had once fixed something for her without making her feel broken. I almost crossed the room then. I wanted to. God, I wanted to close the space, take her wrist in my hand, and tell her I had been an idiot in every direction a man could be an idiot. But wanting was not permission, and the whole point of walking into that party had been to stop letting other people decide for her. So I stayed where I was, and Sloane seemed to understand the effort it cost me. She stepped closer instead. Not all the way, just enough that I could see her pulse moving beneath the silver chain. Her hand rose, slow and uncertain, toward my face, and for one breath, I thought she might touch me. Instead, she stopped with her fingers halfway between us and whispered that if she touched me right now, she might not go back out there. I said maybe that was not the worst thing. She looked at me like I had offered fire and shelter in the same hand. The library door opened before she could answer. Pierce did not wait for permission. He entered smoothly, like a man who considered locked doors suggestions made by people with less money. His eyes went first to Sloane's face, then to mine, then down to the unfolded map in her hands. I watched understanding move across him, not surprise exactly, more like a banker discovering an old debt. He smiled with no warmth and said he had wondered when the ghost from her unfinished youth would become inconvenient. Sloane folded the map against her chest, and Pierce's gaze sharpened at that small act of protection. Then he turned to me and said, almost gently, that I could not offer her a life, only an exit. It was the kind of line meant to humiliate a man like me, and 5 years ago it might have worked. But Sloane was looking at me now, waiting to see whether the accusation would scare me back into nobility. I looked at the map in her hands, the bracelet on her wrist, and the ring on her finger, and for the first time that night, I knew leaving would be the only cowardly thing left. Pierce's words should have made me defensive. That was what he wanted, I think. Men like him understood rooms, but they also understood wounds. He had looked at me and found the oldest, ugliest fear I carried into that house, that I was only good in emergencies, only wanted when someone needed a door opened, a route cleared, a bad night survived. Not a life. Not the ordinary Tuesday morning after the drama ended. He wanted me to bark back about money, or love, or how a man with polished shoes could still be empty inside. 5 years ago, I might have given him exactly that. I might have mistaken volume for courage and made Sloane's choice smaller by turning it into a contest between two men. But that night, with the old map in her hands and her eyes fixed on me like my answer mattered more than I deserved, I understood that if I made Pierce the center of the moment, I would be no better than every person in that house who had been deciding Sloane's life around her. So I did not answer him first. I looked at Sloane. I told her Pierce was right about one thing, and I felt him shift slightly beside us, surprised by the gift. An exit was not a life. Walking out of that party would not magically fix the years she had spent folding herself into shapes other people approved of. It would not make the donors kind, or her mother understanding, or the newspapers gentle if they decided a runaway engagement made a good morning headline. It would not erase the fact that she would wake up tomorrow with people disappointed in her, angry with her, possibly financially tangled in decisions she had never been allowed to make freely. I said all of that because I refused to sell her freedom like a beautiful lie. Then I told her the only promise I could honestly make, if she chose to leave, and if she chose to face the mess after, I would not disappear just because the night stopped feeling romantic. That shook her more than any grand speech could have. I saw it happen. Sloane had been braced for me to play the hero, maybe even angry enough to need me to, because a hero could be rejected cleanly. A hero could be dismissed as reckless, selfish, dramatic, another man storming into her life with his own version of what she should do. But I was not giving her an order. I was telling her the cost and standing there anyway. Her fingers tightened around the folded map until the paper bent at the crease, and for the first time since I entered the library, she looked less trapped by Pierce and more frightened by the possibility that someone was finally telling her the truth without using it to control her. She asked, quietly, what if she left and hated me for it later? I told her then she could hate me honestly, in daylight, and I would still rather face that than watch her marry a life she had to survive. Pierce gave a soft, humorless laugh, but before he could turn it into something poisonous, Blythe Merritt entered the library. She did not knock. Of course she did not. Knocking would have implied that her daughter's private pain had a door. She came in with her shoulders square, pearls resting perfectly at her throat, and a smile so thin it looked drawn on with a blade. Behind her, the sound of the party had changed. The music was still playing, the glasses were still clinking, but the room outside had begun listening. Blythe looked at the map in Sloane's hand, then at me, and I watched her put the whole story together with the cold efficiency of someone rearranging seating charts. She told Sloane the board chair was asking questions, the Halstead donors were confused, and the foundation's spring restoration fund had not yet been secured. She said staff positions depended on confidence, and confidence depended on stability, and stability did not look like her daughter hiding in a library with a man who made a living running toward disasters. Sloane flinched at the word staff. It was small, but I caught it. Blythe had chosen the one pressure point that would make Sloane feel selfish for wanting heir. Not reputation first, not family name first, but people who depended on the foundation, people who might get hurt if she broke the wrong public arrangement. I understood why it worked. Sloane cared about the staff. She remembered assistants' birthdays, argued for raises in meetings, and once spent 3 hours on the phone finding emergency housing for a retired stage manager whose ceiling collapsed during a storm. Her mother knew exactly where to place the guilt because she had spent a lifetime mapping her daughter's soft places. Sloane's breathing changed. Her hand left the map and went to her wrist again, rubbing beneath the silver bracelet. Faster now. I wanted to take that hand. I wanted to tell Blythe that if the Foundation needed her daughter's misery to survive, then maybe it deserved to lose a few donors. I wanted to say a lot of things that would have felt satisfying for 10 seconds and made Sloane's morning worse. Instead, I crossed to the balcony doors and opened them. The old hinges complained, just like Noemi had promised, and humid Charleston air rolled into the library with the scent of rain, jasmine, and the harbor somewhere beyond the dark. Sloane looked at me, startled. I did not touch her. I did not tell her to breathe like she was a child. I just gave the room a way out, because sometimes care was not grabbing someone's hand. Sometimes it was opening a door and trusting them to decide whether to stand near it. Blythe noticed, and her expression hardened in a way the donors probably never got to see. She said my name like it tasted cheap. Then she told Sloane that I would leave again, because men like me always had another storm, another road closure, another damaged town to make us feel important. She said I could afford to be dramatic because I had no legacy to protect, no family name to carry, no institution built on my choices. There it was, the old insult, dressed in new lace. I had no easy defense against it because part of me feared she was right. My life had always been motion. I knew how to set up shelters and move supplies and sleep 3 hours in the back of a truck. I did not know if I knew how to stay in one place long enough to be somebody's certainty, but I looked at Sloane standing near the balcony air with a map in her hand and a ring on her finger, and I knew I wanted the chance to learn. Sloane turned from her mother to me, and I saw the question in her face before she spoke it. Not whether I loved her. That was already too alive in the room to deny. The question was whether my love could survive consequence. Whether I was strong enough not just to interrupt the engagement, but to remain after the whispers, after the donor calls, after her fear came back in quieter rooms. I said I could not prove 5 years of staying in one night, but I could stop proving the opposite. Blythe laughed under her breath and told Sloane not to confuse regret with destiny. Pierce added, smoothly, that everyone was emotional, and that the kindest thing would be to return to the ballroom before people invented a worse story. Sloane looked at Pierce, then at Blythe, and something in her face went still. For a second I thought she was about to fold the map and hand it back to me like an apology. Instead, she lifted it slightly, not toward me, but toward her mother. Her voice was quiet enough that all of us had to stop moving to hear it. She asked Blythe if she remembered the week after I left for the Gulf, when Sloane had stayed up all night writing something she was too afraid to send herself. Blythe's face did not change, and that was how I knew the answer mattered. Sloane swallowed once, then asked the question that made the room feel colder than the rain outside. Did you ever give him my letter? The question landed in the library like something breakable hitting stone. Nobody answered at first. Pierce looked from Sloane to Blythe, and for once his confidence lost its perfect rhythm because he had not known there was a letter. I had not known there was a letter. That was the worst part. For 5 years, I had built a whole life around the absence of one. I had turned silence into evidence. I had made her quiet mean she had chosen comfort, chosen her mother, chosen the safe man and the approved future, and the rooms where I would always look like a mistake. But Sloane was staring at Blythe with the terrible calm of a woman who already knew the answer and was asking anyway because she needed the wound spoken out loud. Blythe adjusted the pearl bracelet on her wrist, a tiny movement so elegant it almost passed for composure. She said this was not the time. Sloane gave a laugh that had no softness in it and said that was convenient, because somehow there had never been a time, not 5 years ago, when she was 27 and terrified and writing my name at the top of a page until the ink blurred, not when Pierce began appearing at family dinners as if he had been placed there by committee, not when Sloane asked once, then twice, whether anything had come from me. Blythe's mouth tightened at that. I felt the floor shift under the story I had been telling myself. I asked Sloane what letter, and she looked at me then, really looked, and the hurt in her eyes was not accusation anymore. It was apology for something that had not even been her crime. She told me she wrote it 3 nights after I left for the golf contract. She had watched news footage of flooding somewhere outside Mobile and seen a man in the background wearing a jacket like mine, carrying a child through knee-deep water. She said she had sat on her bedroom floor in this same house, still wearing a dinner dress because she had not had the energy to unzip it, and written me 4 pages. Not graceful pages, not brave pages. She said she had crossed out half of what she meant, then written it again worse, then finally said the only thing that mattered: come back before I become someone I cannot undo. She had put the letter in an envelope, addressed it to the company field office, because that was the only address she had, and handed it to her mother the next morning because she was too afraid that if she walked to a mailbox herself, she would lose her nerve. I could not speak. I had faced emergency briefings where lives depended on me sounding certain, but right then I could not find one useful word. Sloane had asked me to come back. Not in a dream, not in the version of the past I invented when I was too tired to hate her. In ink, on paper, with shaking hands, probably, because she shook when she was scared and angry at herself for being scared. I looked at Blythe, and she did not look guilty. That was what made anger move through me so cleanly. She looked burdened, misunderstood, almost offended that anyone would question the wisdom of what she had done. She told Sloane she had been young, emotional, and vulnerable to a man who represented escape, not stability. She said she had made a mother's decision. Sloane's face went white, not pale, not shocked, white in the way people look when the body finally understands what the heart has suspected for years. She asked if Blythe had destroyed it. Blythe said she had kept Sloane from humiliating herself. That was answer enough. The map crumpled slightly in Sloane's hand. For 1 sick second, I saw the past rearrange itself around us. Sloane waiting for a reply I never sent, me waiting for a sign she never knew had been stolen, both of us turning absence into character judgment because it hurt less than believing we had simply been robbed. 5 years. 5 years of bad coffee, hotel rooms, storm calls, and telling myself that a woman who wanted me would have found a way. 5 years of Sloane standing in rooms like this, maybe wondering why the man who drew her an exit did not come when she finally asked him to. Pierce stepped in then, because of course he did. He had the instinct of a man who knew an emotional opening could become dangerous if left unsealed. He said softly that this was exactly why public emotion could not be trusted, that old letters and old regrets had a way of feeling larger than real life. He told Sloane that her mother had acted imperfectly, maybe, but out of love, and that she should not throw away a stable future because a buried fantasy had resurfaced at a dramatic moment. The words were polished enough to pass as wisdom if nobody in the room was bleeding. But Sloane turned to him with a look I had never seen from her before, not even in my memories. Quiet, clear, almost curious. She asked him if he had known. Pierce hesitated 1 second too long. That hesitation did not prove everything, but it proved enough. Sloane stepped back from him. I saw Pierce's hand twitch, not grabbing her, just wanting to manage the distance, and I moved before I decided to, not between them, beside her. 1 step, no more. Close enough that she knew she was not alone, far enough that she could still stand without me becoming another wall. She noticed. Her eyes flicked to me, and in them I saw the same thing I felt. Not victory, not romance, not yet. Grief. We had lost something real, and no kiss, no dramatic exit, no public confession could give those exact years back. I asked her then because I needed to stop assuming I knew what love required. I asked if she wanted me to stay or walk away. My voice sounded rougher than I wanted it to. Sloane looked down at the ring, then at the map, then at the balcony door still open behind us. For a moment she looked younger and older at the same time, like the woman who wrote the letter and the woman who never received an answer had finally met inside her. When she spoke, her voice barely held together. She said, "I don't know how to choose with everyone watching." When Sloane said she did not know how to choose with everyone watching, something in me almost broke in the old familiar way. The selfish part of me wanted to say it did not matter who was watching, that she should look at me and trust what had survived 5 years of silence and a stolen letter. But that was not love. That was hunger wearing brave clothes. I had seen panic make people grab the wrong thing because it was closest. A door handle during a flood, a bad road during an evacuation, a person who looked like rescue before they looked like home. I would not let myself become another rushed exit in her life, no matter how badly I wanted her to walk out with me. So I told her we did not have to choose anything in that library, not with her mother standing there like a verdict and Pierce waiting for the moment to turn her fear into proof. I said we could step outside for 5 minutes, breathe air that did not belong to anyone in that ballroom, and let the world keep spinning without giving it an answer. Sloane looked at me like I had offered something more dangerous than running. Her eyes moved to the open balcony door, to the wet black shine of the garden beyond it, to the folded map still crushed in her hand. For a second I thought she might do it. Not leave with me, not choose me, just choose space. That would have been enough. Maybe that was the first honest thing I had understood all night. Enough could be smaller than victory and still matter. Blythe must have seen the same possibility because her voice sharpened. She told Sloane that walking out, even for 5 minutes, would confirm every ugly assumption already forming in the ballroom. Pierce, smoother but no less urgent, said they could discuss everything privately tomorrow, after the announcement, after emotions settled, after everyone had gone home with the correct story. I nearly laughed at that phrase, after the announcement, like a public lie would somehow make a private truth easier to survive. Before Sloane could answer, applause rose from the ballroom. It began scattered, uncertain, then gathered strength as someone near the front called for Pierce. He glanced toward the door and made one small calculation. I watched it happen. He realized the room could still be used, and he moved before anyone else did. He stepped out of the library with the calm confidence of a man returning to his stage, and a moment later his voice carried through the doorway, warm and grateful, telling everyone he and Sloane appreciated their patience and were ready to continue. I felt Sloane go still beside me, not because he had surprised her, but because he had turned the entire room into a hand around her wrist. Blythe exhaled, almost relieved, and told her daughter that this was still salvageable if she walked out now with dignity. I hated that word on her mouth. Dignity, to people like Blythe, always seemed to mean swallowing pain without leaving stains on the carpet. Sloane stood there for 3 breaths. I counted them because I did not trust myself to speak. Then she folded the map carefully, almost tenderly, and slipped it into the slim pocket hidden in the side of her dress. That small act hit me harder than if she had reached for my hand. She was not throwing the past away, but she was not letting it make the next decision for her either. She walked toward the door, and I stepped aside. Blythe looked at me as if she expected me to follow closely, to prove her worst story about me true. I did not. I let Sloane pass first, alone. Only after she crossed the threshold did I follow, not beside her, not touching her, just near enough that if the room turned cruel, she would not have to wonder whether anyone stood with her. The ballroom had rearranged itself into expectation. People held champagne, phones, smiles that had become too bright around the edges. Noemi stood near the arch with her camera lowered against her chest, not shooting now, just watching Sloane with an expression I could not read until Sloane saw her. Then Noemi gave the smallest nod. It was not dramatic. No friend throwing herself between Sloane and the world. Just permission, quiet and human, from one woman to another. I see you, not the picture they want. Sloane's shoulders changed. Not relaxed, exactly, but settled. Pierce stood beneath the roses as if nothing in the library had happened. Glass in hand, smile in place, he thanked everyone again, apologized for the interruption with a tasteful little joke about old friends and high emotions, and the room chuckled because rich people love any sentence that tells them discomfort has been handled. I stayed near the side exit. That was deliberate. Every part of me wanted to stand beside her, but beside her under that arch would have made the moment look like a duel. I had already walked into the party. I had already said the line. The next step had to belong to Sloane, and if I loved her for real, I had to survive watching her take it slowly. Pierce began his speech again, and this time I heard every word like a rope being lowered around her. He spoke of legacy, shared purpose, families aligning, futures built on mutual respect. He said Sloane had always understood the importance of duty, and a soft, approving murmur moved through the guests. Sloane's face remained composed, but I saw the pulse in her throat. I saw her right hand curl once, then open. I saw her mother watching from the front row, lips pressed together, issuing silent commands with her posture alone. Then Pierce turned toward Sloane and reached for her left hand. It was a small gesture, the kind that would photograph beautifully. The groom-to-be lifting the bride-to-be's hand so the ring could catch the light. The room leaned into it. Someone near Noemi raised a phone. Blythe's expression softened with relief too soon. Sloane let Pierce take her hand for 1 second, maybe 2, and in that tiny stretch of time I felt my whole body prepare for loss. Not because I thought she loved him, but because fear can look exactly like surrender from across a room. Pierce smiled down at her, murmuring something I could not hear, and began to lift her hand toward the chandelier light. Sloane looked at the ring, then across the ballroom at me. I did not move. I did not nod. I did not beg with my eyes, though God knows I wanted to. I just stood there, visible and still, the exit behind me open, and then Sloane slowly pulled her hand back. For half a second, the whole room tried to pretend it had not seen what it had seen. That was the strangest thing. Sloane pulled her hand back from Pierce, and 30 people immediately looked for a more comfortable explanation than the obvious one. Maybe she had lost her balance. Maybe the ring caught on her dress. Maybe the bride-to-be needed a sip of champagne before smiling for the photograph. Charleston society could survive almost anything as long as someone gave it a polite fiction quickly enough. Pierce understood that better than anyone. He laughed softly, like Sloane had made a charming mistake, and reached for her again, not roughly. Never roughly in a room full of donors, just with the confidence of a man who expected her body to return to the script before the audience noticed the line had changed. But Sloane did not give him her hand. She stepped back. It was 1 step, maybe less than that, but it moved her out from beneath the rose arch and out of the perfect little frame he had built around them. The applause died completely. I could hear the garden rain ticking against the windows behind me. Pierce's smile stayed in place, though something behind it hardened. He said her name quietly, with that careful warning folded under the tenderness. Sloane looked at him, then at the guests, then at Blythe, and I watched the old training fight to reclaim her. Her shoulders wanted to soften into apology. Her mouth almost formed the words that would make everyone else comfortable. I knew that look. I had seen it in shelters too, when people apologized for needing blankets after losing everything. Some people are taught so deeply that being inconvenient is a sin, they say sorry while standing in wreckage. Blythe rose from the front row before Sloane could speak. She did not rush. She simply stood, and somehow the room shifted around her authority. She told Sloane, in a voice warm enough for guests and sharp enough for daughters, that everyone was tired and emotions had been heightened. She said no one would blame her for taking a moment, but this was not the place to embarrass herself. That word again. Embarrass. Not hurt yourself. Not marry the wrong man. Not sign away the rest of your life because a room expects it. Embarrass. Sloane closed her eyes for 1 beat, and when she opened them, the fear was still there, but something else had arrived beside it, a kind of exhausted clarity. She said, not loudly, that she had been embarrassing herself for years. The words moved through the room slower than a shout would have. She said she had called fear maturity, called obedience grace, called silence loyalty, and somehow convinced herself that disappearing politely was the same as being good. Pierce's jaw shifted. It was the first ungroomed thing I had seen him do all night. He moved closer and said that she was overwhelmed, that old memories had been stirred up, that she should not make a permanent decision because a man from her past had created a scene. He did not say my name. I was grateful for that, because if he had turned fully toward me, I might have forgotten the promise I had made myself not to make this about winning. Sloane looked at him with almost sad curiosity. She told him this was the problem, that even now he could not imagine her choice existing unless a man caused it. A few guests looked down at their drinks. Noemi still had not lifted her camera. She was letting the moment belong to Sloane, not turning it into proof. Pierce's calm cracked then, not wide enough for everyone to see, but wide enough for me. He said I had gotten exactly what I wanted. His voice was still low, still respectable, but possession had finally lost its polish. He said I had walked into his engagement party, dragged up an old fantasy, and confused a woman who had a future. That last word did it. Future. Like Sloane was real estate under contract. I stepped forward, and the room reacted before I said anything. Blythe's eyes snapped to me. Pierce turned with the satisfaction of a man who thought he had finally pulled me into the fight he knew how to win. But I did not speak to him. I looked only at Sloane, because if I was going to risk everything, I was not going to waste the truth on the wrong person. I told her I wanted her. The words came out plain, with no decoration to hide behind, and somehow they were harder to say than walking into the party had been. I told her I had wanted her 5 years ago when she stood in an alley asking for a root out. I wanted her when I thought she had chosen a world that hated me. I wanted her when I saw her tonight wearing a ring that looked too heavy for her hand. But I said I did not want her as a prize taken from another man, and I did not want her as proof that I had finally beaten the people who thought I was not enough. I wanted her only if she could walk out, because something in her had finally chosen itself first. My voice almost broke on that last part, and I let it. Maybe the room needed to hear that I was not made of command and nerve. Maybe Sloane did too. She looked at me for a long time. Then she looked down at the ring. Pierce said her name again, but this time she did not answer him. She turned toward a waiter standing frozen beside a silver tray of champagne coupes, and with hands that trembled but did not stop, she slid the engagement ring off her finger. The diamond resisted over her knuckle for one painful second, and I saw her swallow. Then it came free. She placed it on the tray with a soft little click that sounded impossibly loud. Someone gasped. Blythe put one hand against the back of a chair. Pierce stared at the ring like it had betrayed him. Sloane looked at him and said she could not marry him. Not because of me, not because of a letter, not because the night had become dramatic enough to excuse rebellion. She said she could not marry him because the answer had always been no, and she had finally run out of ways to dress it up as duty. The room did not explode. Real endings rarely do. They crack first. Whispers started near the back, then spread beneath the chandelier light like smoke. Pierce's face had gone flat and pale, but he did not reach for her again. Blythe, said Sloane, in a voice I think had been designed for church scandals and family emergencies. Sloane turned to her mother and said she loved the foundation, loved the people who worked there, even loved parts of the family that had taught her to survive by performing. But she was done trading her life for everyone else's comfort. Then she turned back to me. For a second, I forgot every person watching us. She walked toward me slowly, not running, not collapsing, not escaping, choosing. When she reached me, she said, "I'm not coming because you told me to. I'm coming because I finally said no." I wanted to kiss her then. Every selfish, relieved, starving part of me wanted to. Instead, I held out my hand. She looked at it, and a small, broken smile touched her mouth before she placed her hand in mine. No ring. No hiding. Just her fingers, cold and shaking, closing around mine in front of everyone who had expected her to disappear beautifully. We walked out of the ballroom together. Nobody stopped us. Maybe they were too shocked. Maybe Noemi moving into our path with her camera lowered like a quiet guard helped. Maybe even Blythe understood that command only works until the person being commanded discovers the door. Outside, the night air hit us wet and warm, and for the first time all evening, Sloane took a full breath. I turned toward her, ready to say I would take her anywhere she wanted, ready to give her the world if I could build it fast enough. But she stopped at the top of the stone steps, still holding my hand, and said, "I can't go home with you tonight." For one foolish second, her words hit me like rejection. I had just walked into a room that hated me, watched her take off another man's ring, held her hand while half of Charleston decided what version of the story they would tell by breakfast, and some bruised part of me wanted the reward to be simple. Come home. Close the door. Let the world lose us for one night. But Sloane was looking at me with wet eyes and a steadiness I had not seen inside that mansion, and I understood before she explained. She was not stepping away from me. She was refusing to turn me into the next place she disappeared. Her hand stayed in mine as she said she wanted me, and the way she said it nearly ruined my ability to act mature about anything. Then she added that wanting me was exactly why she could not run straight from Pierce's ballroom into my bed, my apartment, my life, like freedom was just another man's address. I swallowed the answer my pride wanted to give and made myself listen. That was harder than the ballroom. It is one thing to fight in front of people who think they own the room. It is another thing to stand on wet stone steps with the woman you love and not use her fear as an excuse to pull her closer. Sloane said she needed one night in her own apartment, with no ring, no Pierce, no mother, no donors, and no man waiting to name what came next. She needed to wake up alone and know the choice was still hers when nobody was watching. The old me, the man who fixed things too fast because helplessness made him uncomfortable, would have tried to negotiate. The man I wanted to become only nodded and told her I could drive her home. Her face softened then, like I had passed a test neither of us had wanted to take. We walked to my truck through rain that had turned the garden paths silver. Behind us, the mansion glowed with music and whispers, but the sound grew smaller with every step. Sloane still held the folded evacuation map against her chest. When we got inside the truck, she sat there for a moment with her bare left hand in her lap, staring at the pale mark where the ring had been. I did not tell her it would fade. Some marks deserve the dignity of being noticed before they disappear. I started the engine, and for a few blocks, neither of us spoke. Charleston moved past us in wet reflections, gas lamps, iron balconies, dark storefronts, all the old beauty of a city that knew how to hide rot under flowers. Finally, Sloane unfolded the map and laughed softly when she saw the word I had written in the corner all those years ago. Breathe. She said I had always been annoyingly practical with my romance. I told her somebody had to make sure her rebellion had fuel stops. That got a real laugh out of her, small but alive. Then the quiet came back, softer this time. She traced one of the old black lines with her fingertip and said she used to think the map meant escape. I told her maybe it had, back then. She looked over at me, and I said that this time she could draw her own route. No crisis plan, no stolen letter, no man standing at the end of the road telling her who she had to be when she arrived. Sloane folded the map carefully and held it in both hands like something fragile but no longer secret. When I pulled up outside her apartment, the windows were dark except for one kitchen light she had forgotten to turn off before leaving for the party. She looked up at it for a long time, then turned to me and asked if I was angry. I told her the truth, because after that night, anything less would have felt cowardly. I said I was a little hurt, a lot proud, and completely in love with the fact that she had learned how to choose herself before choosing me. She cried then, but not the broken kind. More like her body had finally received permission to stop performing. I reached across the console and wiped one tear from her cheek with my thumb, and she leaned into my hand for one breath before catching it and kissing my palm. That simple touch did more to me than a dramatic night together could have. It said not yet, but not never. It said this was not an escape route. It was a beginning, with both people awake. Before she got out, she leaned over and kissed me once, slow enough to be remembered and gentle enough not to become a promise she was not ready to keep. When she pulled back, her forehead rested against mine, and she whispered that she was scared she would wake up and regret being brave. I told her if she did, she could call me and regret it out loud. She smiled through the tears and said that sounded terribly unromantic. I said I was saving my best material for daylight. I watched her walk upstairs alone. Every step took discipline. Every step also made me love her more. I did not drive away until her apartment light came on and the curtain moved just enough for me to know she had looked back. Then I went to the temporary response office we had set up near the old rail depot and worked through the night rerouting storm supplies with men who knew better than to ask why I was still wearing dress shoes. Around dawn, when the sky turned the soft gray blue of a city after rain, the office door opened. Sloane stood there with no ring, damp hair, 2 coffees, and the folded map tucked under her arm. She looked terrified. She also looked free. She said she was not there to run away with me. She was there to ask if we could choose slowly, honestly, and in daylight. I took the coffee from her hand and said yes before my heart could embarrass us both. That was how we began. Not with a clean ending, not with everyone forgiven, not with Blythe suddenly understanding or Pierce becoming gracious. Consequences came. Calls, resignations, ugly headlines, quiet apologies that arrived too late to be useful. But Sloane did not go back, and I did not leave when staying became ordinary. Sometimes I think walking into that engagement party looked like the brave part because it was loud enough for everyone to see. It was not. The brave part was standing outside the life she left behind, opening my hand and trusting her to come by choice. So tell me, if you were in Sloane's place, would you have said no in front of everyone, or waited until no one was watching? And if you've ever had to choose between the life people approved of and the love that finally felt honest, I'd like to hear your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and come back for the next story, because sometimes the most romantic thing a man can do is fight for her with everything he has, then love her enough to let her arrive freely.